How should PMs be using AI tools and how can they get more productive?
PMs, there's a huge opportunity because PMs, and I think more broadly for non-technical founders, when you have tools that can do these parts of the work for you, the barrier to be technical enough to build a product, at least sort of an MVP product, I think that barrier is much, much lower than it's ever been.
What's the profile of a good early stage startup product manager?
Someone with relevant industry expertise is really important. Someone who understands not just the product and the value proposition, but more broadly, like who are the players in the space. Everything starts with understanding how the company makes money. Because if the company does not make money, there's no company.
Sergio, it's been a couple months. How are you?
Hey, Aakash, nice to be you again. How are you doing?
Awesome. It was super fun collaborating on that fractional product leadership article. And I'm super excited to have you on the podcast because there's very few people that talk about product building, product leadership at the early stage level. And that's where I really see you as one of those people who has a unique perspective. You worked as a fractional CTO at Giggle Finance, Quincia, and a variety of early other stage startups. So where I want to start is, how does building product at an early stage startup differ from larger companies?
Yeah, just a bit of context to that. I've spent most of my time in startups anyway, so I have also worked with larger companies, but I would say DNA, my core is definitely startups, from being a startup CTO for the last 10 years and often being the first person in, the person building the first MVP, seeking product market fit, growing the team and the processes beyond that. So I think the biggest difference in early stage startups is that there's not necessarily a product that works, like there's no product market fit. So the optimization needs to be all around speed. Speed meaning speed of iteration. It's not that we need to do everything fast and everything scrapey. It's mostly that the faster we release the next iteration, the more iterations we get to have, and the more likely it is that we get to product market fit, that the business gets viability and grows and so on. So speed has a point. And I think speed comes as a byproduct of a bunch of different factors. For instance, scoping. There's a reason why people call it minimum viable product. It's because it needs to be minimal, right? So I think my philosophy in this early stage is, let's speak with customers. Let's figure out what is the core of the value prop, what is the differentiator, the moat, as many people call it. Everything else, let's be as scrapey as possible using, whatever frameworks, boilerplates, vendors, whatever makes it fast, and just focus on what's core and iterate on that until we have product market fit. This is actually the hill where most startups die. So this is a bit of a don't die framework for startups in my perspective. That's definitely my philosophy in the early stages. Obviously, after product market fit is found, there's repeatable revenue streams and so on. The game changes and stakes are higher to downtimes and so on. So the approach needs to be shifted a little bit more towards robustness. So I call it two different gears, and we need to know how to switch gears and when. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I have fun doing it these days as a fractional CTO.
Trust isn't just earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned professional scaling your GRC program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or more complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Centralized security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Vanta can help you start or scale your security program by connecting you with auditors and experts to conduct your audit and set up your security program quickly. Plus, with automation and AI throughout the platform, Vanta gives you time back. so you can focus on building your company. Join over 9,000 global companies like Atlassian, Quora, and Factory who use Vanta to manage risk and improve security in real time. For a limited time, my listeners get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/Aakash. That's vanta.com/AAKASH for $1,000 off. This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Adio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Adio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/product growth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/product growth.
So I think that the average product manager, product leader, when they hear product iteration speed, they're thinking experimentation, A/B tests, smaller changes. But the dilemma you run into pre-product market fit is you're not going to have enough data to per se run an experiment. Oftentimes you'll have to just run it to everybody. And even then, if you compare the pre and post, you might be comparing, 30 users or something. So you're not going to have a statistically robust result. What are the indicators you look at and you encourage teams you're working with to look at? Is it session replays? Is it user feedback? Is it basic analytics on how many people are completing a certain task? How do you really assess whether an iteration is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think the inception is before metrics. It's actually talking with clients, and clients meaning, for instance, in B2B use cases, is probably sitting in meetings with them, shadowing them how they do a certain process, let's say manually or using the tools they use today, or hearing their frustrations, understanding what is the actual thing that makes them tick and buy the product we will be building. If it's B2C, it's probably doing user interviews, shadowing sessions as well with potential power users. So that is, I think, the inception of sort of insights to build a product upon. Once there is a minimum viable product and there is, there are users, there's, activity going on, definitely looking at metrics, looking at, drop-off points and stuff like that. So it becomes more of a analytic effort. But I think in early stages, I never really let go of these, let's jump on a screen share and you show me, how you did it or how you did not do it because something happened. Let me hear their frustrations and see them firsthand.
I think that point is really important, which is you want to get that screen share. You want to see how they're using your product. It's not as effective, in my opinion, to ask, how did you like to use the product? What would you improve? I find that those questions are a lot less insightful than actually seeing people use it.
I agree. I also do surveys, and I think, well, in my perspective, surveys are just a top funnel to identify people worth jumping on a screen share with. So I do surveys many times, and but frankly, it's not that I sort of do what is the hot topics that come up from the survey and let's build them. I think it's just a top funnel to say, oh, okay, there's this, cluster of people very frustrated with a certain topic. Let me pick a few of them and shadow them and see what's going on. And also the other way around. There's these few people who seem to be our first power users. Well, let me learn everything I can from them. What is the exact thing that they love? And let's just find more people like them.
Could you walk us through a story with a company you've advised about how you guys use this process of talking to customers to iterate to product market fit?
Yeah. Actually, I can give you an example of my own product that I launched recently, and I've just recently gone through this jobscopilot.ai. Um, that actually came from my own Twitter presence and LinkedIn presence, where obviously in the current job market conditions, a lot of people spend a lot of time just sending CVs, applications, and not getting much traction. So I figured the job market, especially for people looking for jobs at startups, is super fragmented. There's thousands of startups hiring, very nice remote positions, but each of those, it's just a lot of them, so very fragmented. So I built this scraper, scrapes 400,000 career pages, so churns out any new job that is posted online every week and serves this to people. So that is the rationale. But then I started talking about it on Twitter, and some people started onboarding. I promoted it on my newsletter, and I started getting customers. And as always, some people just don't figure out how the product works. They churn. Some people use it, but they have frustrations and they ask for more features. Some people become power users. So there's this usual distribution very early on. And what I did is I started sending these sort of surveys to sort of cluster people like the churner, the power users. I was really just interested in the power users first, and then I was interested in the drop-off points. And what I did really is I shadowed them on a bunch of sessions. For example, I learned that the product worked very well for people in certain industries. For example, software engineers, which I guess it's my own background. So all the clustering and all the algorithms work better then. And I learned, for instance, I had a lot of demand from people in finance, and the product didn't work at all for those. Like, it didn't come up with the good results. The jobs were there, but they were not searchable. These are findings that I could only have by shadowing people and looking at the actual way they're using the product. Then I learned also there were frustrations with geographies because, for example, for people in the US, especially big cities, it was great. There were a lot of jobs. Cities were well labeled and so on. When you go international, there were like language challenges, which I didn't account for early on, and so on. Again, these are things that I can only figure when I jump on a screen share with a guy in the US, a guy in Spain, a guy in India, and so on and so forth. So that's what I use. First, surveys, and second, these screen share sessions to figure out more.
And how did you iterate on that with the insights you were getting from the screen shares?
Yeah, most of these things were so. In that specific case, the product got validation very early on. So the core value prop that I was proposing to the market, like automate job search and automate the application process, it got validated. So the people that were churning were just because the product didn't fulfill on that premise early on. So these sessions were not so much towards pivoting the proposition or anything like that. They were more around, okay, if the product is not good enough yet, let's make it good enough, good enough that people don't churn so much. So it was mostly finding these clusters of profiles for whom the product didn't work so well, so they would churn, finding the power users and doubling down on things for them. And I ended up developing features that I wasn't really thinking. For instance, I had clusters of people that the jobs they wanted were very specific, and the companies don't really promote them online. So it's very specific. It's kind of a private, they go in private communities and so on. But people wanted the auto application flow. They wanted to be able to auto apply to those jobs, like input their CV and a few demographic data. And they wanted my tool, the Jobs Copilot, to apply on their behalf to all of those jobs. So based on those requests, I built a flow that allowed them with the URL to just input the job. I collect all the data from the job and get the applications out for those for those jobs automatically. So that was something that I wasn't really thinking of, but became a bit of a retention tool for people in certain pockets, uh, demographic clusters that for whom this was important.
And I imagine you were getting a variety of customer requests. How did you prioritize the application customer request over others?
Yeah. So in this particular product, I found that different requests many times come just because people have different backgrounds, different job preferences, and so on. So what I did is I prioritized around the clusters that I considered being my power users. In this case, like software engineers, first remote, then not simply remote. Um, and I built a really robust data labeling and searchability and so on around these specific type of profiles that is very heavy on hard skills like the Python, the JavaScript, and so on, um, as opposed to other clusters of people. For example, people in operations, customer support skills are a bit more, let's say, soft skills, so they are harder to label and to search for. So I deprioritized those requests because they would be harder to fulfill, and also the impact would be lower because the percentage of people in my user base um, in that cluster would be smaller, and also thinking about distribution channels, I would be getting less of those, so the impact of such a feature would be smaller. So it's ultimately just a byproduct of impact, and in my case, it was sort of how does this index to the demography, the demography that I have the most, and I will likely continue having the most, which is in this case people in tech and specifically software developers and neighborhood, positions in that neighborhood.
So, if I had to boil down the solopreneur product scientific process, start with surveys, figure out users who you can screen share with to see the product, collect feeds, user requests of features, then look at those features in terms of impact and work, and who are going to be kind of your future power users, and prioritize those features that have the most impact for the least amount of work.
Exactly. Pretty much. And actually, Akash, I can tell you an example with a product that is like a VC funded product that I was actually fractional CTO of, and ultimately joined as a full-time CTO and sort of late co-founder as well, called studentfinance.com. I joined in 2019, and I was the first person in for the tech side of the house. So I built the first MVP. I talked to the first users. I knew them by name and so on. Same process. And it was a much more complex product. It was a B2B2C lending product. So just too long didn't read. We would partner with schools, let's say tech boot camps and so on, as a channel to finance the education of their students. So you see the steps there. So validation is obviously more complex in such a scenario compared to a SaaS product. So, but the process was pretty much the same. So first we need to close schools. So we went to schools, and again, there's a long tail. There's the tech boot camps, there's sales, vocational courses, there's AWS certifications, there's Salesforce certifications, there's, a myriad of other things. There's a forklift operation sort of vocational school. So it's a long tail. Again, we focused back then on a tech bootcamp, specifically on software development, data science, UX design. From them, we narrowed down to the students, and then we narrowed down to specific loan ticket sizes and so on. It was exactly the same process, a bit more B2B. So not so much like surveys and screen shares. It was more like actual meetings, sales meetings, demos, and sort of white glove onboarding kind of thing. Even with the B2C side of the house, the actual students and the lending. But the process repeats itself. And I think that's really I would call it sort of the blueprint I followed to get from nothing to, product market fit and something that lands repeat sales.
In early stage startups like that one, Founders and CTOs often play the role of product head. Can you describe the role of CTO as early product leader?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point because I do play a lot the role of a product manager early on as the CTO. Not always, though. It really depends on the founding team, on the founder skill set. I work a lot with founders that are from sales backgrounds, actually. So my CTO role becomes very, very broad, going from sort of a sales meeting of this is the value prop we are selling, all the way to just find out the product that fulfills this. So it's a huge scope of you know uh, uh, that fits my role as a fractional CTO, and yeah, in that big scope of work, one of the things I do is being the product manager, figuring out what product to build, talking with customers, and so on. Um, Again, if it's sort of a B2B use case, I'm in sales meetings. I do the white glove onboarding, which most B2B products end up having. I figure out the product to fulfill that. I get the team to operate on that and to execute to build it, and deployment and iterations based on that. If it's B2C, often I'm not so involved in talking with customers unless many times for like bugs and issues, stuff like that. But again, I'm looking at the metrics, I'm looking at the mix panels, or whatever we use, and figure out like where are people churning, where are people dropping off, or where I look a lot at reviews. Fortunately, we live at a time where feedback is many times in the open. So it's not just that we want to learn from them, but we actually want to prevent that to happen in the first place. So we need to be on top of that, learn, and execute fast to fix those issues. So that's usually in my scope of work as a fractional CTO early on, and that changes when there's product market fit, because usually with product market fit there comes a revenue, of course, because clients are landed, closed, and well invoiced, so revenue grows. There's also usually VC funding, so the whole company becomes more sort of viable, more sustainable from a financial standpoint. So the team ends up growing as a result. And with that team growth, I need to narrow down my scope of work. And one of those things is usually to delegate the product management scope of work. So usually we hire someone who kind of understands the use case or can learn it, who is just really good at doing the actual product management work, like look at the metrics, talking with the clients, and the users, because sometimes client and user are two different stakeholders. One buys, but the other uses, and we need to learn from both. And yeah, at that point, I kind of step down a little bit from my product manager hat, but that usually comes, several months down the line.
How do you know when you're ready to hire a product manager?
A good one. Usually, as the company grows in terms of number of clients or number of users, there's a lot more work that pops up from like customer support, product variations, implementation in B2B use cases. Some clients sometimes ask for customization and stuff. All of these things become very time consuming in digging into the details, like, okay, what does client A want? What does client B want? How can we avoid becoming sort of a consultancy that builds custom solutions for A and B and C? No, we don't want that. So we want the core product. We want to grow our core product with their demands and make it adaptable, So the usual thing goes that we want to make the product as scalable as possible. Usually at the same time that all this product conversation happens, there's a similar conversation happening on the tech side of the house. Like, oh, this MVP we built, out of a type form glued together with whatever. This is cracking left and right. So we need to kind of build it with a more scalability and robustness in mind. So that usually pulls a lot my attention as well, to robustify a bit the actual technology, the architecture, and so on. And when I need to delegate, I usually delegate first the product management work and I stick to the tech work, which eventually, as a fractional CTO down the line, I end up, obviously hiring people and growing an engineering team that sort of absorbs most of that work from me as well.
What is the percentage of time a CTO should be spending on product work before and after hiring a PM?
Um, I think hiring a PM is a bit of a byproduct of getting to product market fit. And there's sort of a fundamental difference in approach, which is pre-product market fit. We are trying to do different things until one works. After product market fit, we are trying to do more of what already works. So I think pre-product market fit, I spend a lot of time in product. In some weeks, close to 100%. Other weeks, obviously very little because, there's these humps when one week we are figuring out what to build, the other week we are actually building. And as a fractional CTO, I'm constantly dueling between these two different things. But pre-product market fit, I spend a lot of time in doing product work, talking with clients. In some cases, this is tangentially sales and marketing work as well. So I join sales meetings in B2B type use cases. I work very close together with the marketing folks at B2C campaigns and stuff like that. So early on, this is a lot of what my work looks like before product market fit. Once we get to product market fit and we start having these growth pains where I'm spreading myself too thin with analyzing metrics and talking to clients and figuring out which features to build next to optimize on certain growth metrics. That's when we hire product manager. And after that, as a CTO, I spend much less time in product work because, well, there's a product manager doing that for the team.
What's the profile of a good early stage startup product manager?
Oh, that is, different people would probably answer differently. I think in my perspective, depending on the product, but many times, or I would say most often than not, someone with relevant industry expertise is really important. Someone who understands not just the product and the value proposition, but more broadly, like who are the players in the space? I work a lot with very back-end centric products like data pipelines, verification flows, and so on. So in these type of environments, there's a lot of native knowledge in the industry, like what are the common partners that startups use for, let's say, KYC and demand laundering and, credit record checks and bank aggregation and so on. So if someone new needs to come in and just dig through all these, it's actually a bit of a ramp up time. So in such industries, which most of the time I'm working in such industries, I'm often looking for people who have this native understanding of the industry, usually from past jobs. Other than that, I think there's a cultural aspect, someone who is just very adaptive to change, because even after product market fit, many startups mistake product market fit as it being a moment in time, like there's a before and after, when in reality is sort of a period of experimentation, not just sideways, but in a sort of forward facing momentum. But many times is not, clear cut. Is you kind of have repeat sales, but there's these few things that don't work. Sometimes it goes in periods. There are, for example, for products that are seasonal, this is a common mistake because suddenly you have a peak of growth. Yeah, well, we have product market fit. We are growing so much, and suddenly next month you degrow. You have a lot of churn, and suddenly things don't work, and you just mistakenly assume that the metrics were caused by you when it's just market conditions, seasonality, or whatever. So it happens a lot. Like tourism stuff, e-commerce with Black Friday, Christmas, and so on. Education has also the cycles around August, September. Job market also has peaks in September, January, and then flats in around summer, for example. So many markets have these type of behaviors, and sometimes we get mistaken by looking at those. And what it means is that product market fit is not a point in time; it's a period where you kind of went through these hoops and it kind of works. So this to say that a profile that I often look for in a product manager is adaptability. Someone who is happy to just go through the humps and figure it out as we go, and potentially figure out that what works today does not work tomorrow. So we need to find something else to pivot to and to iterate upon. Someone who loves the clients, the customers, like the users of the product. I think it's really tough for a product manager, and certainly many people hearing this are going through that. And be strong. Obviously, I respect that a lot, but I think it's really fundamentally tough to have to talk with users and clients in a use case that you don't like. Like you need to feel some familiarity with that. In some use cases, there's a feeling of being a bit of a missionary. I remember when I worked at Sion Finance, I felt I was really helping people. So jumping on calls, even sometimes after hours, is like, no, I'll do this push because this guy will get an education they wouldn't get otherwise. And then I was getting, really warm messages from people, thanking me for the product we were pushing and so on. I'm feeling that now with Jobs Copilot as well, people finding jobs that they would not even know that company exists otherwise, and they got it through the tool I built. So that is amazing to feel, and that really helps a lot. One do the job well.
What is the compensation for early stage startup PM?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Well, it really depends. I think product management is going through a lot of change. I think, a lot of companies, there are companies reducing PM headcount. There are other companies. So there are different schools of thought going on, while some startup type of VCs and accelerators say you should hire PMs earlier. Others say you should not hire PMs at all. So there's a lot of things going on. Also, these market dynamics with remote companies moving back to the office, startups being founded just remote. So I think what I'm seeing in remote, like I managed my teams fully remote, is usually, so my use case is a US startup early stage that has just got product market fit or, in the surroundings. And needs to grow. And part of that growth is starting a product management team, which is a team of one for now. They are usually hiring overseas, like in Latin America mostly, because of overlap. And also, I work a lot in fintech, and for example, Brazil, especially Argentina as well, are really rich in fintech experience. They have really big markets for fintech there. So these companies that I work with are hiring mostly PMs remotely there, and they are paying. I mean, that really ranges really, really widely, but probably like 80K, 100K a year for a pretty senior with industry expertise PM, which is much cheaper than they would hire in the US. That's the very reason they don't do it. That was always the plan A, is for a US company to hire people in the US. But it's very competitive and it's very expensive to hire in the US. So they end up doing it overseas. And what they do is they offer a very competitive package for people in those demographics, like a guy in Brazil, let's say, who is experienced, worked in the local fintechs and so on, as a very attractive profile for a US fintech. A startup in these conditions is really eager to have the opportunity. And for that person, the salary in this kind of range is really attractive, is above local market.
Okay, so pay a little bit above local market rates, but go to markets where you have that differential. Where I'm hearing 80 to 100K, typically your startup PMs in the US are making like 150 to 200K, so
Exactly.
almost half the cost.
Exactly. When if you compare if you look at it from the perspective of the individual, they were making probably like 40, 50, sometimes less, like 30 or so K in local market, local currency. So for them, they are doubling their wages or 50% more or whatever. While the company is exactly as you say, paying half or whatever around that figure of what they would pay for a local PM in New York or San Francisco.
And how does that compare to the developer salaries?
I think for developers, same reasoning applies. I think there are slight differences. For instance, uh, I think it's easier to make software development processes more asynchronous, and that broadens massively the talent pool that can be hired. That's why many US startups are hiring in India, Pakistan, uh, nowadays even across Africa, like Nigeria, South Africa, and so on. Just because those talent pools have much lower local cost of living, and people end up accepting lower salaries just because it's so competitive. And even like a 60K salary for someone in those geographies is like a life-changing money compared to local salaries where they would hire like a third of that or even less. And also, there's very solid talent in those places. People who know the technical skills pretty well. They have good experience. Many times they worked with international companies. So even if they are in a sitting in their home office in India or Pakistan or Nigeria, they have probably worked for a few years with US startups or startups in Europe. So they have these um, I would say work methods and sort of work ethic from those places as well. So even the adaptability is not that big of a deal most of the times. I mean, of course, there's a lot of selection to be done in the interview process, but I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I don't really look back. And it's way beyond the costs. It's really to just find the right talent, whatever really that talent is sitting around the world.
What's the right way to hire these early stage PMs? Do you guys go through like 5, 7 interviews and a work product? Do you fly them out to meet them in person? How do you think about what are the mistakes you have made and how do you think like a best in class process would look?
Yeah, I think it depends slightly on the environment, but I think there are some fundamentals I like. More and more, I'm leaning on this approach, not just for PMs, but also for engineers, of having a more lightweight and very practical interview process and onboarding people on a more, let's say, trial type of situation where, okay, there's this project, let's work on this for these 2 months, and then let's evaluate. Or also, I see a lot of people hiring on a fractional capacity, and fractional capacity being sort of a stepping stone to sort of a dating before getting married type of scenario where, okay, you are full-time employed, you work with us, 2, 3 hours a day for a month or two, and let's see how it goes. So I see more and more, and I definitely align with that. I see these interview processes getting more hands-on and more into sort of trial type of thing, obviously paid. That's paid to an hourly rate or prorated to the contract discussed or whatever. Um, and I think it works pretty well. I believe also this is more possible in remote work because most people work on a contractor agreement. So there isn't I think for people working on, or in most countries, people working full time cannot really have another contract on the side without breaching their existing full time contract. So I think for on site positions, this might be, a challenging approach from a legal perspective. But for remote work, I see this happening more and more. Also because talent pools are so big these days, easily a remote role gets over 1,000 applicants. Um, so, I mean, it's common that if a company does like a 5-step, 8-step interview process, it's a huge commitment. Several people of the team involved, interviewing, 20 people, 30 people, just to make a decision, which ultimately, I mean, all decisions are subject to be wrong. So I find this approach much more interesting and much more immediate. I see decisions being made, in just a couple of days. Talk with a few people. This person seems to be the best from the pack. Let's hire on this 1-2 month contract for this project. See how it gets delivered, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, everyone goes likes how it goes, and we start a full-time contract.
That's what I've been hearing more and more from early stage startups is if you can do a work trial, I think the one difficulty sometimes people face, especially with that example you gave of like, I'm in Brazil, let's say I'm working at Nubank, the local fintech there, I have a full-time role. It's very hard for them to do a work trial because they would really have to leave their full-time role. So does it mean that you have to change the profile of people you're looking for?
Yeah, and I think it's also a byproduct of current market conditions. There's a lot of people in the market, and so the odds of you finding enough people that are willing to do that, it's actually higher than 2 or 3 years ago when companies were tearing their hair apart to just find one good candidate. Now they have multiple, and they can afford to have this type of selection process. Of course, people who are unemployed and have a lot of bandwidth are at an advantage in the job market these days because they can definitely go through those things. But I see more and more people, especially in time zones that allow that. For example, working for the US, people in Europe or India or even Latin America to an extent can play between time zones. They can work in the morning for their employer, and they can work in the afternoon for the American startup. I see a lot of different conjunctions of these. Either, for example, I have a full time in Brazil or in Portugal or whatever, and I work in after hours, 2-3 hours a day for this new company that I'm just doing this trial with and see how it goes. And the commitment is that if it goes well, I ditch my full time and start working full time with this new company. I also see many people, and I think, well, perhaps it's selection bias, but I know a lot of people doing this in Brazil, specifically in Argentina, probably across Latam more broadly as well, which is, oh, I got this great offer from a US company. I'm going to take it 8 hours a day, and I will speak with my local employer to reduce my hours to part time. So, from the employer perspective, it's like, okay, I get this sort of core team to stick around, well, just on a part time basis. They commit to specific number of hours. For example, a guy working from Brazil to a San Francisco based US company. They can work in Brazil in the morning for their employer, and then they work the full time for the US in the afternoon. It's not that I fully recommend these and so on, because I see a lot of people burning out over these multiple, work assignments. Even myself as a fractional CTO, many times I find myself in this position because it's always so easy to squeeze this extra client and so on. So I think from the individual perspective, this needs to be taken with care. Not just from a burnout perspective, but also from a delivery perspective. If I take more work than I can do, I'll do the work poorly, and that hurts my reputation, and it's not good for anyone. So I think, that is happening and needs to be taken with care. But from a company's perspective, companies are finding opportunities in these little things like onboarding people on a non-full-time capacity, onboarding people from different time zones. I find it interesting because we are definitely moving away from the zero or one, like a binary type of scenario. You are either not in the company or you are full time in the company. I see a lot of space in between getting filled in multiple different ways.
And there's recently been all this talk. There was a Stanford study 10% of engineers are ghost engineers. As a CTO and product leader, how do you make sure that the people you're hiring aren't overemployed and aren't taking multiple jobs?
Yeah, I think in startups it's really hard to do that kind of stuff because the team is small and I mean, if you sit idle for a couple days, obviously, that will not only be noticed, but there will be issues that need to be addressed, and um, you know, there will be not just spotted but acted upon immediately. Um, I think what you referred to is probably much bigger companies where it's tough because it's a lot of people, a lot of management layers, projects that many times don't have a clear timeline, clear outcomes that are expected, clear owners to things. So there's so much falling between the cracks that people can probably sit idle for a good while and no one really notices. I don't see that happening in startups, certainly not early stage. My typical team is just a few people, probably 3, 5 people, 10 people, sometimes 15. Um, so in these small team sizes, it's really hard because everyone is really accountable for a set number of outcomes. Also, remote work, or at least the way I do it, the way I manage my teams, is very much around outcomes. So I don't really care if people spend 1 hour or 10 hours. Frankly, now with LLMs, I prefer to think that they are spending 1 hour instead of 10, just being smart about doing the work. Um, and I recommend that fully. So if they find the time to do freelance or to do whatever, or do their own, launch their own SaaS product, or, I find that interesting. And as long as the work is being delivered, I should not really care much about what they do with the rest of their time.
Sticking on the theme of that first product hire for a little bit longer, you mentioned only 10 to 15 people. So your product hire, what is like the rule of thumb? How many developers do you have? How many founders do you have before that product hire? And what is the right level? You mentioned experienced PMs. I guess that could be a big range. Is it, 3 to 4 years of PM experience? Is it 12 to 15 years of PM experience? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, I don't think there's a ratio that applies everywhere. I think it depends fundamentally on the founding team. Many times, or sometimes, the founding team has um, like someone who is very inclined in the product work. For example, many times founding teams have one of the founders that is this person that will be the COO one day, and that person takes a lot of stuff in between foundation and growth, and that includes all of support to sales, a lot of sales meetings, customer support, um, a lot of operational work around manual tasks that need to be done, sometimes even finance and so on. And this person many times has such a rich context about everything going on that this person is like the oracle from a product management perspective. This person knows the users, knows the challenges, knows the vision, can glue everything together and distill it into like a product roadmap and tickets to be worked upon. So in such cases, the hire of the PM will be done later, just because these co-founder will basically be doing that role, even if not with the title, for a very long time. Other times many times I work with founding teams that are very sales oriented. Even if it's multiple founders, they're all salespeople. So that's what I was telling earlier. In these scenarios, my range of work, my scope of work is really broad, from closing the sales meeting all the way to figure out what product to even sell, and build it and so on. So in those scenarios, I think the ratio kind of applies whenever the team is, whenever there's a proper roadmap, there's PFM, and the after product market fit, the team grows. Yeah, that ratio starts kicking in, and if we have usually, I would say, if we start approaching like a team, or typical composition is like, let's say we have, let's say 5 or 6 software engineers already working potentially on more than one thread of work in the product. We have a designer, we have a QA, we have already infrastructure work to be worked upon as well as part of the roadmap for scalability stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts. Uh, and I think in such cases, having a PM is just a backstop that we are not wasting money on all those people doing stuff that will ultimately be rolled back or just be done inefficiently and whatever. So I think ultimately it depends a lot, not just on the size of the team from an engineering perspective, but even before that, it depends a lot on the actual founding team and the profiles, and if any of the people in the founding team is filling the PM role for these initial phases of the business.
In those two different scenarios, the scenario where we do have a product-oriented founder and the scenario where we really have sales founders, who should product be reporting to?
I think, so I am a believer, this might be controversial in startup CTO, sometimes communities. I think PMs should not report to the CTO. I think this might be slightly philosophical, but from my learning over the years, there needs to be a little bit of tension between technology and product, because product wants to build the right thing and they will optimize for that, while technology wants to build the thing right and we will optimize for that. I've sort of learned to adapt and mix a little bit both and consider the trade-offs in the early stages. But as the team grows, the PM will be a team, the CTO will be a team, and these teams need to have a little bit of healthy tension. It's normal and common and expected and positive to have some sort of discussion between product and technology. As a CTO, when I hire a product manager, this is something I always ask and discuss, like, tell me a time you didn't agree with the CTO. Tell me a time where the engineers told you something takes 2 months when you expected it takes 2 weeks. How did you go about that? This is the type of tension I mean. Like, everyone wants to push this in direction. It's just they are optimizing for slightly different things. So I don't think PMs should report to me as a CTO. They should report to the CEO. I mean, eventually there will be a head of product. PMs report to the head of product, and the head of product reports to the CEO. I think product managers, Leon, and at some point our head of product should be very, very involved in the, let's say, sales activities, marketing activities, even fundraising, because that provides them critical input around the North Star. They need to optimize everything below that, all the tiny actions around. And yeah, I think some tension is healthy, and I embrace that.
The other kind of leg of the stool is design. Who should design report to?
Yeah, good point. Many times design reports to me. I'm a terrible designer. I'm a backend guy. I'm that guy that always says design is good unless there's a missing button or a missing data field. I don't have that much of a design eye. So I don't really like in concept that design reports to me, but many times early on, that's what happens. I love, working with great designers. I learn a lot. But I think as soon as there's a product organization, all design should be labeled sort of product design, and they should report to product.
Okay. So there's another school of thought, which is that like design should also not report to product, that design, product, and engineering should have a healthy tension. When should that happen?
That is also, that is also possible. I think I've been in places where, so actually, to your previous question about hiring product managers, there's another angle that I didn't touch, which is sometimes the first product manager is not hired, is just promoted from a different role, either an engineer or a customer support rep or a designer. Uh, that changes a lot this equation because depending on where the PM comes from, many times from internal function, um, that PM will be leaning very natural to one of the things. If it's a design PM, that person will be a product manager and a designer probably at the same time. And when the organization grows, that person will have both product and design. Same when the product manager is an engineer, probably that organization will be very much mixed together. I think design plays a critical role. I agree there needs to be tension. Perhaps the products I've worked on are mostly very back-end centric. So although I worked with great designers, usually the need for really polished design comes a little bit later on. I think compared to, for instance, like consumer apps and stuff like that, where the MVP needs to already have a very polished design, even if the infrastructure is not yet scalable and so on. I haven't worked much in those scenarios. So in sort of B2B use cases, very backend centric sort of data pipelines and so on, I think design concerns come just later on. What we do have a lot much early on is UX type of challenges, like how easy it is to onboard a client, how easy it is for them to achieve the critical value they need to extract from the product. And that usually falls into me, first of all, and then a PM. So designer comes in much later on. And in my experience, usually under the PM, or rather the head of product, the product side of the house when it exists.
And what's the mental model for scaling the product team? When do you go from one PM to multiple PMs? Is it when you have multiple product teams? Obviously, the founders, as we've talked about, play a big role. But let's go ahead and assume you have that first PM, As you scale, 10 engineers, 20 engineers, 50 engineers, 100, how do you think about PM scaling?
Yeah, I think what happens many times is that the team is broken sort of cross-functionally around, to handle like a specific part of the product. Sometimes that is per user. For example, marketplaces, there's a B2B and a B2C side. Very naturally, very early on, there will be two squads, each of them headed by a different PM with different engineers under them, working on different sides of the product, which typically is like two different apps or, two different products with different functionality sets. So that is a typical way to break a team, is to split according different customer segments. And customer segments, like, for example, I mentioned scenarios of B2B2C distribution. Like the B part is usually API integrations into marketplaces and so on. So it's a different class of product from the actual end user app, which is usually dashboards and polished data visualization and actions for them to do. So this happens a lot in my experiences. We start splitting the team around different user demographics that use the product, or different feature sets in the product, which will end up having different sort of goals and OKRs and metrics and so on. Other ways to do it is, which I personally don't like as much, is splitting more functionally, like a PM for the infrastructure side, a PM for the app, and so on. I think that creates a lot of silos. It obviously may work and certainly works in a lot of different contexts, but I think it's better to have vertically split teams with clear goals that are aligned to the company's revenue or reducing churn or whatever top line goals. I think splitting teams horizontally creates a lot of room for vanity metrics. We optimized the deployment speed by 50%. And how does that move the needle terms of revenue and profit and so on. We have no idea. And I think, yeah, it's better to frame those things on a functional level with top line metrics, and I prefer to split teams vertically.
What are the mistakes that you've seen early stage PMs make?
I think a common mistake, not just by PMs, by the way, is over-indexing to sort of process-based metrics, like how many tickets we shipped last sprint, how many, all these type of things that kind of make sense for top management, make it so easy to track something and say we improved on something. But it makes it also so easy to completely lose track of what creating value means for the company, what adding revenue, what reducing churn, what increasing profitability, means, for the company. I think it's not just PMs, although PMs are probably the tip of the iceberg for those type of conversations. I think, the industry indexed so much on things like Scrum and very heavy processes, full of meetings, full of metrics that created by the actual process, and full of meetings to discuss the metrics from the process. So I think this is an overarching mistake that I see is an overinvestment on robust processes that becomes sort of a project in themselves. Is let's optimize the process for the sake of the process-based metrics. And that loses completely track of the what value means for the business, and that sort of it's like an epidemic. It contagiates all the team members, because suddenly engineers are making tickets smaller and creating a lot of sub tickets, just because instead of 2 or 3 tickets, I can push 10 tickets to prod this week and I'll be the winner. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, but I see these little things happening in so many teams. Fortunately, startups, at least the ones I've been working with, I've been quite successful in shifting them away from these heavy processes and into more lean approach that really focuses on creating value for the clients and revenue, profits, reduce churn for the company.
What are the processes that people often overinvest in? Are they Scrum related processes, sprint related processes? What are the things that you're often cutting?
I think definitely like anything that involves counting number of tasks or number of lines of codes, this kind of thing doesn't really add value per se. And I think it's a very poor heuristic to creating value more broadly. And especially it disaligns incentives, because suddenly people are not incentivized to think about the business and the users and the feedback they are receiving in the support tickets. Suddenly they are incentivized to think about the Jira board and the tickets in there and which ticket to pick to optimize for these metrics. And I think that's just wrong. This happens not only in product management, of course, and not just in processes. I see it in engineering as well. People sometimes refactoring stuff just for the sake of making it, a few milliseconds faster to deploy or something, which is all good, of course, and it's all progress. It's just sometimes there's a myriad of other initiatives that would be much more value creating for the business, and people focus on these sort of specific metrics from specific parts of the process that are not bottlenecking anything. They are not critical, and they're just a distraction.
We talked about some of these mistakes around processes. What is kind of the minimum viable processes you need then to actually develop features that make an impact on output metrics?
Yeah, I think everything, in my perspective, everything starts with understanding how the company makes money. Because if the company does not make money, there's no company and there's no job, no anything. So understanding who are the clients and what are they buying, like why are they buying the product and what do they value in the product. This might be surprising, but so many engineers have no idea. If you ask them, even sometimes engineers that have worked in a company for a year, 2 years, if you ask these kind of simple questions like, who are the clients? What are they buying? Why are they buying the product? They cannot come up with a clear answer. Granted that some business models are complex, so it might take a while, but everyone in the company should understand what the company does, who are the clients, and why they buy the product, because that's what you are building, is the product. So I think it starts with that. And then you need to create initiatives that index to those company goals, like, which all boil down to increasing revenue, reducing churn, or increasing profitability, or sort of, hardly a mix of all three, sometimes one of them. So as you create initiatives, an initiative could be, let's say, in a B2B environment, let's integrate with these new clients. Totally objective, client will pay us, so this is revenue creating. Let's make sure we onboard the client properly. Another type of initiative could be, let's improve the process of onboarding a client, because if instead of 3 days, it takes 3 hours, we can onboard more clients much faster. So we increase revenue much faster. Another type of initiatives along the same kind of example could be, let's improve a certain module in the system to remove a bottleneck. Let's say make deployments faster, or make a certain API connection faster, or remove whatever bottleneck, because that will allow us to cut from 3 hours to 3 minutes. And that will allow us to improve, to ingest clients much faster and grow revenues much faster. So you see, it could be like a very sales-oriented initiative. It could be a process-level initiative. It could be a very technical initiative. But either case, it should index to a specific goal of the company. In this case, increasing revenue. The same exercise can be done for reducing churn, for whatever. And I think this is something that anyone in the company understands. Like, we all need to make money, so we need to remove whatever bottlenecks there are to make money, and we need to make it easy for new clients to onboard faster or easier, or in a whatever better way, so that we can collect their revenue earlier, and we can probably avoid them to churn after onboarding. So I think having that kind of a clear North Star in anything we do helps a lot. Understanding then if how that is broken down. I understand complexity grows a lot if the team is big, because there are a lot of dependencies. Also, I'm a very big proponent of simple architectures, at least early on. Like, avoid things like very fragmented microservices and so on, because that is a sort of a blueprint for teams to be built around these different modules, and suddenly a bunch of silos built in, and a bunch of decisions and tickets need to be created for any simple initiative. So the simpler the tech architecture is, and the simpler the team is, the easier it is to actually do this, like create initiatives that index to a North Star and don't have these huge fragmented sub-stories and so on that entangle together with multiple dependencies. That is really hard to understand who's doing what, who's bottlenecking these, and ultimately, why have we completed all the tickets and the feature is not live yet, which is something that happens very often.
Love it. Let's move on to your philosophies on building product. You believe a lot in cutting down scope. Explain.
Yeah, I think we have, all of us, I think, well, engineers certainly do have, and I do have as well, a natural inclination to scope creep. We want to make our things perfect. We treat our products like our babies, so we want nothing to be missing for them. And I think that natural inclination needs to be purposefully backstopped, needs to be sort of fought against, because most often than not, there's a small percentage of what we build that actually moves the needle. Everything else will eventually be abandoned or refactored or changed in some way. So this is sort of, let's say, the philosophy behind it. And also, the smaller the product is, the easier it is to iterate. So early on, pre-product market fit, this is actually fundamental and actually a survival instinct to have small products that allow us to have more iterations until we get to product market fit and to a more scalable product proposition that we can actually invest in growing. So cutting down scope many times comes in the form of, let's say a few examples, um, using a vendor instead of building something internally. Sometimes it is expensive, but cuts, let's say, 2-3 months of building something in-house. For example, for very operational intensive products that like in B2B environments, sometimes I see companies investing a lot in fancy, nice looking UIs, expensive designs and so on, which probably are not needed because whenever we figure out the functionality is not what users need, and we shift and we pivot to a different functionality, that fancy UI is just, more robust technology that we need to migrate. So it will take more time. So I believe in cutting scope as sort of a survival mechanism to just get to product market fit early on. Of course, later on, it's not so easy to cut scope. Like we cannot cut on certain infrastructure configuration that will allow us to scale to 1 million clients. I mean, if we don't do it, company will fail. So we need to do it. So the stakes of not doing some parts of the scope will increase as the more the company grows, the more revenue comes in, the more clients we have. But early on, I think we should be ruthless in cutting scope.
A related point is you've wrote a lot about how important it is to launch early. How does that relate, or how does that differ from reducing scope?
Yeah, it does. I think launching early comes in different ways. So launching early, usually what we are looking for is proving demand, right? So the earlier we prove demand, the earlier we get to product market fit and to revenue and to scalable revenue streams and so on. I think that is opposed to a lot of sort of school of thought that existed when I was in university and so on, which is more in line of the build it, they will come, like build your product, make sure it works perfectly fine and so on. And only then you go out and sell it. Sort of a factory type pattern for factory from like physical products. I don't think that applies to software. In software, everything needs to be much faster. And sometimes proving demand is just drawing a landing page and building a wait list or pre-selling the product you haven't yet built and promising to, early access for a price reduction or something. So these little things help you prove demand and help you gain momentum, like make sure that the effort you are investing in building the product is not in vain, it's not a waste. So this isn't the very early moment of, going from 0 to 1, actually launching the first version of the product, the first MVP. Of course, after that, you start collecting feedback. First of all, does your value proposition even resonate with, enough people to make it like viable to consider it, sort of a source of validation? If so, you start having feedback. You start having people onboarding you to the product or engaging with you and asking for stuff or asking questions. Oh, does this work for people in finance, or does this, automate this part of the process? Perhaps some of it you just say, yes, that's exactly what you're thinking. Others you were like, oh, I hadn't really thought about this. Let me perhaps create a new landing page with just around this and test it with enough people to see, if it ticks or does not tick. With enough people to make it a product. And that's really how you iterate early on, and you build really minimum product feature sets around these things to test in the market. Of course, it goes without saying that sometimes you actually do something that really works. And if you, if you really build something that works, imagine you throw a landing page and if people sign up and your product is just, like crap. It is like really some clunky a spreadsheet and Zapier's glued together, with a UI that is something you just found online and put to work in a few hours with, Claude or something. Um, Imagine suddenly it resonates so much that so many people on board and you suddenly totally underwater, um, you know, product do not service the demand, this cracks left and right. Yeah, of course. At that point, the whole proposition flips. Now you have high stakes. You have a loss for how long your product is this MVP that is so clunky. So you actually need to improve the product. You have huge validation, huge signal, so you know exactly what to improve upon. But you need to do it fast, and that's also something that if the product is minimal enough that you can improve it on top of what it is now, it's great. Many times what happens is that a new product is built on the side. Imagine sometimes MVPs are built on clunky sort of no code tools and so on. They can only do so much. They prove demand, and then has these sort of haha moment exists like, oh, this is right, like selling like hot bread. We have more clients than we can handle. Then you actually need to build from scratch. So, I mean, that's the good problems to have, as I tell my clients. I wish all startups had this type of problems. Sadly, many of them or most of them don't actually ever get there. So yeah, that's when building a product and assembling a team really fast comes into play. And I think it's great. I love to have that challenges in my life.
That's the most fun time to build product. Should early stage IC engineers and designers be speaking with users, and how often?
Yeah, I mean, I have. This might not be so popular, but I think in theory, yes. In practice, that is a really hard one because imagine if you're asking about speaking with clients from a customer support perspective, like this client is already a client, is paying, but has some problems. Bringing in, for example, an engineer is actually usually a good proposition because the conversation is about objective technical topics. If you're talking about, and designers even more, of course, because designers will be collecting feedback. If you're talking about involving engineers in a pre-sales moment, imagine B2B and involving these technical stakeholders in before the sale is made. I see huge concerns from founders because many times engineers are not the best communicators, and sometimes they will say that something is actually not built or not possible or not feasible or whatever. So they will not have this I would say understanding of what the sales process looks like, what the sales meeting looks like, and so on. And what I see is whenever I'm in companies that this kind of approach is a requirement, like we want to hire engineers, that we are comfortable putting them in sales meetings and in front of clients, sort of independently, that suddenly becomes a very important part of the hiring process for these engineers. So something we validate in the moment we hire them. And what happens is that the hiring process becomes more complex because you're suddenly not just hiring for technical skills and fit in the tech stack and the engineering culture. You are also demanding them to understand the product and the market and the clients and fit in a sales meeting and so on. And as I heard a few times is that if you find an engineer like that, that engineer is a startup founder already. It will not work for you. Possible, I don't know, but I'm many times in that situation myself where clients ask me to join meetings with clients, with investors, and so on. And I think my communication skills are an important asset in that conversation. I reckon many engineers, many designers don't have such skills or such experience to be in that. So I take that with mixed feelings. Like, should engineers and designers talk with clients? Absolutely. Like, absolutely. They should talk with designers. They should with clients. They should understand clients. They should hear from them and they should talk with them. In practice, if you make that a very hardcore requirement, and their presence in meetings could potentially compromise the actual close of a sale or something, then it becomes a really high requirement for the profiles we hire, because obviously we need higher profiles. That impacts budgeting, that impacts a bunch of things. So yeah, I've seen that sort of being rolled back a few times. Um, and most often than not is like there's this one or two people in the design team or the engineering team that actually interface with clients, because actually many engineers don't have that willingness. I mean, they want to understand the use case, the clients, and so on. They don't necessarily want to be on sales meetings. In some, to some extent, they have a point, because if they spend a lot of time in these meetings, I mean, that detracts from their IC time to churn out features. I mean, it's a bit of a philosophical discussion. I think it needs to be sort of top down, sort of mandated as a core part of the culture. Do we want a culture where everyone is part of these meetings? If so, we need to sort of upgrade a little bit our requirements for the people we hire, especially in regards to communication and understanding of the industry. Or do we want to have just a few people doing that, and that simplifies hiring a lot, but then creates potential silos later on in the team where some people have exposure to clients and people don't have, and there's a natural silo building up from there.
I think it has a big impact on the model. Like you mentioned, if you're trying to hire asynchronous engineers in India, but all your customers are in the US, and you're trying to have them meet your US clients, well, there's a 10.5 hour time difference or 13.5 hour time difference, depending on East or West Coast, and becomes a big burden on them. It almost seems like you have to think about a different model of like regionally located engineers if you truly want to drive product engineering.
Yeah, although that combo specifically happens a lot, a lot. I'm a big part of my work is interfacing with the tech teams of either clients or vendors or partners of my clients. And all of those companies are US companies, but the tech teams is like myself in Portugal, the client's tech team in India or, Brazil or Pakistan or so on. So I can tell you from the front lines of startup world that use case of the tech person or tech team of a US company is most often than not in the US at all.
Moving on to another process, we talked about minimum viable processes a little bit, but I really want to hear kind of your hot takes and words on Scrum. Scrum is, I think, even more than agile, even more than even product management. It has been one of those product development processes that have really taken off. If I look at like how many people have adapted the basic principles of Scrum, when I started in tech world in 2008 to where we are in 2024, maybe it was like 20-25% of people really taking it on. Now I feel like it's like 90-95% of people. But you have some harsh words about Scrum, so say more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a lot of Scrum, so I talk from experience. I found myself and my team spending a lot of time on pointless meetings, like meetings that were sort of part of the boilerplate of the process. With Scrum, you are already subscribing for those backlog grooming sessions, then the sprint plannings, then the daily stand-ups, the retrospectives, and so on. It's a lot of time. Like it's like 6, 7, 8 hours per sprint just spent um, on meetings that are part of the process itself. And in those meetings, we are mostly, for example, backlog grooming. Many times I found myself in such meetings where, backlog is like a wild forest. It's like, is that place where no one wants to go without a machete. And many times I found myself like, guys, this is absolutely pointless. None of this will be built. Let's just focus on, these meetings we had last week or the client feedback. That is definitely what we want to focus on. These tickets written 4 months ago. I mean, it's not even worthy for us to delete these tickets because, I mean, this is just process for the sake of process. So I think Scrum imposes a lot of boilerplate that is really, really, it is really distractive from what value brings to the company. And it also creates a lot of metrics like the cycle times and the number of tickets and all these things are, easily gained by all people involved. And people suddenly shift their incentives from what the company does, what clients want, and what brings value on to how can I push more tickets, how can I reduce my cycle time, and so on. Which is it's not good at all. I find myself many times in meetings where I was actually accountable for the outcome. So this was a defeat for me. Like when I realized this is not pushing on some PM or whatever. No, it was me. I was the one calling the shots. And I find myself very frustrated at times with things like, concluding in a retro that we were winning and coming out of it and realizing we were losing. Meaning we were winning by the Scrum sort of monitoring metrics like, we reduced cycle time. We pushed more tickets than in the past X sprints and so on. So we are winning. Yeah, people are celebrating. But then I talk with CEO and I'm like, no, we didn't ship any value. Like if I need to tell an investor, like what important feature we pushed last quarter, we're like, no, there were a lot of tickets, but like this big feature is like 80% there is not shipped yet. And this other feature is like, it was shipped, but it's actually not something very important. It was just a epic that we wrote. And then we kind of realized it was not so important, but since it was written already and all the team was already doing it, we decided to do as well. So many times I found myself really frustrated with these things. Number of meetings, quantity of process, the metrics it inserts in the team that are super distracting from the actual work, the actual creating value for the company. And really when I work remote and work asynchronous, all these meetings get in the way. Like if I have team members spanning between Philippines and Argentina, what is the good stand-up time for all of them? What is a lunchtime stand-up? What is an early morning stand-up? Everyone is spread around the globe. So it was simply not feasible. I had to abandon meetings very, very aggressively. And some of them made them asynchronous so moving from there, what I landed on is transactional meetings to keep track of status, let's say stand-up type thing. We just make it asynchronous, like, report until X date, X hour of the day, UTC, and that's it. For actual collaborative planning, we make them less frequent and more around the impact. Like, as I was saying, like, imagine this, scenario I said earlier. That's this big client we are onboarding. So we have to onboard the client, but we also need to make the process of onboarding a client more efficient. And that means, removing this technical bottleneck and so on. So we make an epic around that and the distributed tasks around that. So there's a clear value nugget at the end of the road for that. And we do a sort of what would be a sprint planning and so on a per initiative basis, not on a 2 week or 1 week or 3 week or whatever mandated by the framework. So I think that was the shift for me. One big push was just to reduce meetings because meetings were not working for my team at the time. And frankly, I stick with it. I never really moved back to Scrum after that.
I think a lot of people are having this realization. We might have reached the era of peak Scrum.
I hope.
We've talked in and around the topic of remote work pretty extensively in this podcast so far. I want to steelman the other side for a second. Especially at the early stage, it feels like we need to be doing more in person than more remote work. It feels like we're kind of sacrificing a little bit of the magic that we were talking about, for instance, with the tension that arises also the magic of brainstorming, the magic of keeping your headphone engineer connected to the business outcomes and the customer problems. When we do create these distributed workforces where we're selling to US customers, we have founders in Europe, we have PMs in Latin America, we have engineers in India. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think ultimately teams should find out what works for them and double down on that. Um, I think for me, I, most of the teams I work with on a daily basis, I have even a tough time understanding what in person would look like where, how, the logistics are monumental because people are spread around the world. So there's no office to go. There has never been. So in my context, teams operate remote because there are fundamental reasons to that. Most often than not in startups around costs, because startups are not able to hire engineers in the US, so they hire overseas, and that comes with sort of burning the ships, and one of the ships getting burned is that there's no such thing as an office to go, even if they want occasionally to do it. Of course, there are team retreats occasionally. There are these things, and those are great. But there's no such thing as, oh, we're launching this big initiative. Let's all, work from the office next Monday. No, there's not really an office to work from. And that is the decision that was made. I certainly don't disagree with your point that having a lot of people in person to do some collaborative activity, they will definitely achieve more often than not. I think that's great. That doesn't happen every day, though. Even for teams operating on a sort of hybrid basis and so on, they will find that most days in the office will be frustrating because there's no such, whiteboard collaboration happening. They are just sitting there with their headphones, just doing icy, deep work, and they are not doing any of the fun parts of going to the office. Other times will be super fun, super productive with a whiteboard and everyone collaborating together. What I found is, well, in my context of startups being remote by default with people spread around the world, I found ways to mimic that office collaboration that work pretty well. For example, if you open a Miro and you have everyone in that Miro board, that creates the vibe of a whiteboard session in the office. Of course, you need to create sort of foster the participation culture that allows for the 5 people in the room or 10 people or whatever to all participate equally. Or you more likely want to cut participants and do those sessions on a more granular level when you plan something new, so that the 2 or 3 people are actually super engaged, super into the topic, and are super relevant to that collaboration. So I found ways to do that async. Or rather remote. Async is more challenging. I hear you. I think it's hard to do collaborative type effort asynchronous. Requires a huge level of commitment and understanding of the process, and it's not easily found people to commit to async collaboration like that. But remote on a meeting, even if one person is in the US, another in Brazil, another in Portugal, Nigeria, India, whatever, everyone in the same meeting, I think a lot of collaboration can happen over just like a Miro board or a Google Doc that everyone is contributing to at the same time and talking through it as we go. I think it has the exact same vibe as being in the office with a whiteboard, everyone with a different marker and collaborating.
The funny thing about Miro is that they have an office culture. So they built this product for remote collaboration. Both you and I use it. I have a remote team as well for product growth. But it does strike me as something interesting going on where even they've decided we have to work in the office.
Yeah, I don't have context to that. It's a bit the opposite of, let's say, Linear and so on, which build products for, well, not only remote teams, but used prominently by remote teams, at least a lot. And they are remote and they sort of eat their own dog food. They use their own product for the exact use case of their intended clients to use it. Yeah, I don't know about Miro, the backstory there to go to the office.
What is your thought on all these big companies returning to office? Amazon is moving to 5 days in January, your Google and all of those companies have moved to 3 days. Is it a good thing?
Yeah, I frankly don't think I don't like to put those things into a good or bad type of framework. I think there are a bunch of incentives that lead them to do that. I don't think those incentives are very related to performance and productivity, to be honest. I think in the case of Amazon, I know a lot of people that are resigning right now just because either they were hired remote and they never lived in Seattle, or they moved out of Seattle and even out of the US a long time ago, and I mean they would need to fully rearrange their lives to just go back to the office, and they decided they are not doing it, so they resigned. On the flip side, Amazon is hiring aggressively, so um, this thing was kind of on purpose. They want to reduce headcount from a certain demography they have, and they want to hire new people. Uh, Certainly, a lot more context there that I don't have. Probably they are hiring on different salary bands or whatever. I don't know any of that. But I think the incentives for companies to move back to the office are way beyond productivity and performance measurement. I think it's more around, office leasing costs. There are sunk costs already, and it is what it is, and they need to have an office anyway. So why not put the people there? Also, reducing headcount because they know by now there is probably studies around this, like how many people do you get to resign if you move back to the office. So if companies want to reduce headcount by a certain percentage, that is an approach many companies are taking because they know certain percentage of people will resign. If it's good or bad from a, let's say, productivity perspective and so on, I think future will tell. If companies in the office ship more or better than companies remote, I don't think I'm seeing much of that, especially because startup world is now very much remote by default. Well, frankly, mostly because of costs early on, because no one really wants to lease an office when there's not even a product or anything. I mean, I can't imagine this used to be the norm just like 10 years ago when I founded my first startup. Um, Nowadays, no one does that. Everyone is remote. The team is in India or in Brazil or whatever. Founders are themselves in different cities. I have clients where founders live in different countries and they haven't met each other in person for over a year. And companies are soaring, revenue and so on. So I think there's a lot of nuance. Every case is probably very specific and there's a lot of further context to it. But I think companies can grow and products can work and teams can collaborate either remote or in the office. It's just a matter of setting the culture appropriately.
I was expecting a hotter take in favor of remote work, but I'd have to agree with your balanced take. And it seems like the real hidden incentive for a lot of these big tech companies is that voluntary workforce reduction. They don't want to do another layoff, so let's add more
Yeah,
time
but
in the
you know what?
office.
That's where I have a bit more strong opinion. Is a lot of the press releases you see in the news about returning to the office mention people slacking while working from home, like no productivity for remote workers and so on. And that is absolutely false. Like, I mean, obviously there are people slacking in remote, like just like there are people slacking in the office, and obviously that has to do with management and accountability and so on. But putting it as a blank sheet, like people in working remote, doesn't work. They are not productive, so they need to move that back to the office. That kind of pisses me off because I'm working with remote workers every day. At this point, I worked with thousands of them, and yeah, many companies are being built solely by remote workers. Many of them outside the US, and they do work. They are growing. Some of them really, really aggressively. So I get a little bit pissed off when people dunk on remote work just to distract on their actual goals of moving back to the office, which are definitely not productivity related. It is what it is. I do think remote work works, and if the culture is right and the processes are appropriate to the product being shipped, I think it does work very, very efficiently.
It does work efficiently. I think there's one thing I personally am feeling after starting my career from 2008 up until Corona, when they all sent us home in 2021. I was always in person. Since then, I've worked remotely. I do feel like there's an impact on my mental health and my energy levels. I just feel like Zoom somehow, even Miro, it like zaps your energy. And it kind of reduces like your connection with your coworkers that now I need to pay more attention to making friends in real life and I can't just rely on like the inbuilt friends and social
Which is good, right?
interactions.
That should not be framed as a problem. That is good. Like we are supposed to, I mean, we are social animals. We are supposed to make friends and to get to do hobbies and sports and find our local communities. So I think the fact that we relied so much on our workplace to do that fundamental set of activities for human being, that is actually a bug, not a feature. That is, you know, even if people go to the office, they should still make friends outside of work because then what? You are laid off next month. You lose all your friends. You lose all, all your community because everything was tied to your job. No, you should have accountability on like making friends and creating your own community, having hobbies. I see why remote work can be damaging for many people's mental health. Also because, I mean, you're in New York, I'm in Lisbon. Um, I think we must acknowledge that we are privileged in a lot of ways. Like, we work in houses of a certain size, it's like one family per house, and there's parks outside. There's all this infrastructure that makes life probably a bit more pleasant. I have had many team members that work remotely from housing conditions that are way inferior to that, like multiple families per house. They work from a bedroom that is shared with their younger brothers. It can really be tough conditions. So remote work can be damaging in a lot of ways. I understand that. Office work can be damaging in a lot of ways as well. So I think people are accountable to find, those friends, communities, hobbies, practice sports, take care of their health, regardless of working remote or in the office.
Enough on remote work. Let's talk about AI for a second because I think you're actually, because you're not um, just a normal person going to the office and working, you actually get a lot of opportunity to use these tools, test out these tools, see how encourage your engineers to use these tools, see like what the cutting edge is. And I think the Twitter community in general, people like us, we're using these tools a lot more than everybody else. So for the people who haven't used them as much, talk to us a little bit about what are the real productivity gains we're seeing in engineering, design, and product management with AI tools? Like sitting where we are today at the current state of this technology, how much is it really helping? We're all hearing about V0 and Cursor, and I think it's relatively unclear whether these tools are actually making engineers a lot more productive and what the impact of that might be.
They are, I think a few things are happening, both good and bad. These tools are amazing. Let's just start with that. It's like magic happening before our eyes. It's just that all this magic is not always producing correct results. So we need to be very vigilant at the same time as we observe these sort of magical things happening. I think tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot, even ChatGPT and Claude and so on, uh, they help a lot software engineers, like a lot. It's like a glorified autocomplete, if nothing else. Instead of writing like a full for loop, like 20, 30 lines of code that would take, just busy work, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever, it's like, boom, a tab key and it's done. And unless it is not done correctly. So you need to be vigilant and review the code. But I think still it's an easier problem domain than actually writing the whole code. Also, I think there's a sort of interactivity and discussion angle to it, which is, I like pair programming, but pair programming in a team with a colleague is expensive for the employer, right? Because it's like I pay twice. I pay two people to do the job of one. just because they do it together. So I think there's a bit of that vibe with these AI tools where you have this sort of companion, giving you suggestions and brainstorming with you and teaching you like what is the right syntax here and there. Some people say it's like having an always on 24/7 senior engineer to bear with. It kind of is in certain domains. Again, sometimes it's not correct, so it's not an oracle. It's something that is also subject to faults. And also, one activity I find tremendously more productive and frankly more pleasant as well is pair programming. Like nowadays, when I jump with a developer in my team on a screen share over some topic, I mean, in 1 hour or 2 hours, we achieve the work that we would probably otherwise do in days, a week, or something like that. Just because the time is not so long invested with syntax quirks and looking up how to do this certain thing in this language or how to engage with this API, like this authentication is not working. So it's less figuring out and it's more like, okay, this is what we want to build. We both look into an IDE, either Cursor or with GitHub Copilot, and we just churn out code really fast, 2 people reviewing it, and it's quite amazing. And it's way more pleasant because it's like a level of abstraction higher than it used to be. So I like that. To the question, do these tools make software engineers more productive? They absolutely do. They also can easily make the output poorer if we are not vigilant enough. So I think that's where seniority comes in, like knowing what good looks like, so that whenever those 50 lines of code get produced in 5 seconds, you skim through them and you see, oh, wait a sec, this is not right, and you either change the prompt or you fix it manually or whatever. So I do that a lot. I use these tools since pretty much they came out. I've been lecturing courses at O'Reilly for on these topics like AI tools for software engineers, both a book and also courses about these specific tools. I've had, I think at this point, over 20,000 or 25,000 students. So I'm observing these patterns pretty closely. I think we are in a very unique point in history, and I find this fascinating, where there are companies prohibiting these tools, like banning from their VPNs. You cannot access ChatGPT or whatever. You are banned. Like it's grounds for termination if you use these tools in the office. So there are companies doing that. On the other side of the spectrum, there are companies using the Cursor dashboard, the number of tokens used, as part of the performance evaluation of developers. Like the more you use the tools, the more likely you are to be promoted or to be salary raised or whatever. So the spectrum is immense, from companies banning these tools all the way to companies forcing the use of these tools. And obviously there's a bunch of others in the middle, like either creating their own tools with sort of walled garden guardrails, companies just recommending and investing in training, all these things going on. But I find it fascinating, and I think absolutely they are helping a lot. Software engineers, certainly designers, product managers as well. I don't think they are this thing as some companies market as you do a prompt and you have a product built. I don't think any of the tools did anywhere close to that. I think for specific parts of the work, there are tools that are very, very good. But still, even the good tools do, very bad outcomes sometimes. So we need to remain vigilant.
So engineers are getting more productive. What about PMs? How should PMs be using AI tools, and how can they get more productive?
You know what? I think for PMs, there's a huge opportunity because PMs, and I think more broadly for non-technical founders, because what does it mean to be technical and non-technical anymore, right? These days, when you have tools that can do these parts of the work for you, you have the Zapiers of the world that glue different tools together and so on. So I think the barrier to being technical enough to build a product, at least sort of an MVP product, I think that barrier is much, much lower than it's ever been. even with no code and so on. I think these tools can help, at the bare minimum, a non-technical founder or a PM that has a non-technical background. They can help these stakeholders to write little scripts of code, write an integration with an API, then perhaps glue that together with a Zapier or something to write to an API, and then have some front end built on top of that to allow users to log into and so on. So I see. I've seen even before AI, non-technical founders and certainly non-technical PMs as well build proof of concepts and so on, or using no-code tools like the Airtables, the Bubbles, and so on and so forth. I think nowadays that's happening even more. So I think, yeah, if you are a non-technical PM, I think there's such a great time to just build products and not simply rely on having engineers who are capable to build it, robustly and so on. So perhaps for PMs, it's not so easy because most PMs, regardless of their work, is in a big company or in a startup. There's an organization around them, so they cannot just say, "Oh, you know what? From now on, I'm doing it myself." So that's why startup founders and solopreneurs. I think that type of independence is probably no longer so much, held back by lack of technical skills as it used to be.
So I think it's also making PMs more efficient in like three major ways. So first, PMs need to do a lot of data analysis if they're any good. And I think, you can go from writing a SQL query and having to iterate on it and do a limit 10 and fix your subquery and fix your join. Usually, for me, even very good at SQL, having written it for 16 years, it would still take me like 20 minutes to write a good SQL query tying together several tables. With AI, it seems to take about 2 minutes. So your amount of time to getting the data, a lot shorter. And then AI like Claude can even chart it very fast. So you get the downloaded CSV and it'll chart it. So your data analysis goes from what might have been an hour task to 10 minutes. On the user research side, as you said, we have more feedback than ever. We have feedback coming from our Slack channels. We have feedback coming on G2 reviews. We had feedback coming from sales calls. There's now AI that can basically synthesize all of that and pull out the relative clips for you. So data and user insights, I think AI is helping with both of those. And then what do PMs need to do? They need to write good documents. They need to write good PRDs, good strategy documents. And I feel like with a tool like Claude, if you write the first 20%, Claude can take you from 20 to 80%, and then you can edit the final 80% to get your document. So basically everything, you're becoming more efficient. So I feel like even for PMs, there's a lot of efficiency to be had from learning and trying these tools.
I agree. I think even ChatGPT these days can produce charts, and there are specific tools. I think the fascinating part about this is that we start with ChatGPT, Claude, and so on that are sort of general purpose. And every use case that you can think of is now having vertical tools just built around that with data set, the models trained on specific data sets on that industry and so on. Data analysis is definitely one of them. I found a tool called Julius AI recently, which does very nice charts and does data clustering very efficiently. It's kind of magic, to be honest. I love this. I think we are living in the best time.
So the question then arises, our PMs are getting more efficient. Our engineers are getting more efficient. I think design is kind of one of the areas where it's a little more questionable as of today how much more efficient they're getting. But probably they'll also get more efficient as we see improvements in these tools. What does it mean for the future of these careers? If you start to put on your pontification hat, like we're in GPT-4 era today, but if GPT-5, 6, and 7 are sufficiently mind-blowing, like what do these careers look like in the future?
Yeah, no one knows, right? I think none of us has a crystal ball. I think the paradigm is shifting fundamentally from, what does it take to ship a product? Like going from an idea, like a business idea, to having a product to fulfill it. And careers arise from the fact that you need a team, and different careers arise from the fact that this team needs to be composed of people with different skill set, the designer, the developer, the QA, and so on and so forth. I think in a time when a non-technical founder can probably glue together an MVP, uh, first hires will come later. And in a time when PM is way more capable than ever before, perhaps the team of 10 PMs is going to be just one or two. And same for engineers, the team that would be like 20 people, 50 people, 100 people down the line, perhaps now is like 20, 30% of that. At the same time, there will probably be way more companies that there used to be, just because the cost of creating software is much lower than it has ever been. So instead of having, let's say, a CRM category, you will have CRMs for solopreneurs, for farmers, for whatever. Software is going to be really niche, really vertical, and really cheap to develop. So I think teams will be much smaller on average. I'm not sure employment will decrease as the global. There's actually this funny anecdote, if you look it up. When ATM machines were invented 50 years ago, all analysts, all the McKinsey type market analysts predicted that the bank teller job would just, be removed forever. That it would just disappear in next decade. Turns out, if we look at the data, it more than doubled since then, the number of bank tellers. And it's maybe counterintuitive, but I think we are in that point in time with all these tech workers, regardless of the specialty skills, software developers, PMs, designers. I think the case with ATM machines was that it became so much cheaper to launch bank branches and new banks and so on, that competitivity in the market, competition increased so much that way more banks opened, like new banks, more bank branches across the US and so on. And even if the bank teller job is doing only a part of the job that used to be done, the need for that is much more. So if a typical bank branch would have like 10 bank tellers, now it has just 2 or 3. But there are so many more bank branches that the global number of bank tellers increased by more than 100% compared to 50 years ago. So I don't see any reason for the same sort of market conditions to not impact these tech professionals, where the cost of software will come down so violently that way more companies will be created. I don't think you even can imagine that. Teams will certainly be smaller. I don't think we will have so many companies with these thousands of employees anymore in the next decades. I do think we will have just way more companies, way more fragmented marketplace. That I guess jobs will increase, and certainly, like even the job titles, the skills required will massively change as we go, just like it has happened in the past decades. Like I'm now coding on software languages that were invented in the last 2 decades. Even the product manager job title, that wasn't a thing, 20, 30 years ago. It is a pretty recent concept. Fractional CTO, like it's also super, super recent. So the market is evolving, and the skill sets required for taking those opportunities that arise will certainly be different as well.
Okay, we spent so much time on how to build great product in startups, and I hope people got a lot of value out of that. I want to use this last bit of the podcast to learn more about Sergio. And I think where I want to start is you mentioned 2 major things you do, actually 3. So you have your own micro startup, which is like a solopreneur startup that you have, which is Jobs Copilot AI. And last time we talked, it hadn't even been launched, but now you've made tons of progress on it. So it's obviously a big portion of your time. The second thing you have is the fractional CTO work. That's how we first really had our first collaboration back in March when we deep dive into fractional roles. And then the third thing you mentioned is O'Reilly and advising folks on AI tools. So these are the 3 buckets we've heard about in the podcast. Are there any more? And how do those buckets break down in terms of both your time and your revenue?
Yeah, That's correct. And I think um, being a fractional CTO is what I call my job. That is my main activity is the simple business model. I trade time for money, well, with variations and so on, but ultimately that's what it is. I actually love to do it. I think even if the other revenue streams grow so much that I don't need to work, I think I will still work on this capacity with startups that I'm passionate about. I learned just so much about different industries, different tech stacks, people working from different countries and different team compositions. I kind of love it, and that's fundamental to me to work as a fractional CTO with very early stage startups, non-technical founders in different industries. Um, and that accounts for most of my revenue on any month. Um, Second, you're right. A new sort of kind of unexpected opportunities came from this unexpected place where people who find me on Twitter and LinkedIn invite me to speak at events, invite me to lecture courses to um, their software developers, or to speak at conferences, or in the case of O'Reilly, to launch both online training courses on their platform, which I deliver live, like once, twice, sometimes 3 times a month. I also do custom trainings for big clients such as like Bank of America, Travels Insurance, like Fortune 500 companies. I do trainings on AI tools and processes and all these things to their software developers or to their sort of tech leads and engineering managers. Um, and I do it through O'Reilly, and I do it also externally. I'm also writing a book with O'Reilly, which will be published next year, AI tools for software engineers. Very exciting, and that really pushes me to learn all these tools to be on top of the wave, which is a really tough job to do. I must be honest. It's so much, so much change every week. Um, and third thing is, yeah, definitely, I'm launching my own products. Jobs Copilot was just the first one. I'm about to launch a B2B flavor of it, which is the Job Market Compass dashboard for recruiters and HR professionals to be on top of all jobs that open in the market, get signals for, new client leads and so on. I started this project as a way to just get get my hands really, really dirty on these AI tools, train my LLMs, my models, my build AI agents to fill forms, to parse data, to scrape the web, and so on. Really fun, learned a lot. To be honest, that feeds a lot of my pipeline as a fractional CTO because I get more and more clients who want to build products along those lines. Like they want to collect information, they want to train AI agents, they want to, whatever, build some AI or LLM powered product. So learnings go hand in hand. I learned from one side, I applied to the other, and vice versa. Um, these parts from a revenue perspective and time perspective. So the courses are scheduled, so it's not something that I allocate a certain bandwidth of my time. They are pretty well paid, so I like that part, of course, because it's a much higher hourly rate than I would get as a fractional CTO. But it's occasional, and frankly, I like the work as a fractional CTO way more. I must be honest. Um, my own SaaS products is something that I started from my own sort of curiosity and learning purposes. Revenue is still not something that I account that much for. I also don't put that much of energy into it as I potentially should. If I add my sort of startup founder hat, I take it as side projects, and I want to launch more and more of them. Of course, I want them to be good, and I have a couple of freelancers helping me, making them good and servicing the customers and getting more customers. But I take them as something that I want to build, to learn, to grow to a certain extent, potentially at some point sell. But I certainly want to build more of them, to learn more things, more industries, more technology.
And you basically have a fourth dig too, which is you write a lot of content on X and LinkedIn. So if somebody is aspiring to be you, what are the systems you have in place to manage these four responsibilities?
Yeah, and I have my own courses as well, which I take as a sort of sort of a sidestep from writing online as well. Um, I think actually writing online changed my life way more than I had planned. Frankly, I didn't plan for anything. Um, I think most of my fractional CTO deal flow these days comes from LinkedIn and Twitter, people who read my content. O'Reilly came from an editor at O'Reilly who read a thread on X that went super viral. Um, you know, even other clients that I have for conferences and so on come either through O'Reilly or through my content. So it became my top funnel source of clients for any of these revenue streams, even for Jobs Copilot. All the people who subscribe, well, perhaps not all, but certainly 80 to 90% are people who follow me and follow my newsletter and so on. So I can only recommend anyone doing anything to write online about what you know, what you do, what you're doing, like what you're building on your spare time and so on. Because trust me, nothing happens for the first 6 months, nothing at all. It's just like you're talking to the void. It's kind of frustrating. As someone coined at some point, it's the valley of cringe. You just invest time, you expose yourself, and nothing good happens or bad either. But then things start to happen, start getting DMs, start getting people to engage with you. And it's a snowball. Like I discovered the other day, someone sent me a photo. They bought a book and they found a screenshot of a tweet of mine in the book. And they sent me like, hey, you are in this book. I didn't know, you know this guy? It's like a super famous writer. And I was like, no, I don't know him. I have no idea. I didn't know I was in that book. So things start to happen, like YouTube channels. People pick my polls on Twitter to use as sort of statistics on certain topics. I wouldn't even imagine all these outcomes happening, and this is like a snowball. So I think you should distill your learnings, your experience into writing. I think X and LinkedIn make it really low stakes because the content format is very open, it's very ad hoc. You can make it very short. So you don't need to make those fancy 2,000 word sort of well-formatted articles. And I think it's also a way to just learn, because people will engage, people will not agree with you, and they will come with a counterpoint, and you will learn from that. I learn a lot every day by writing online, and that is the fundamental key point of it. Everything else is sort of just a happy coincidence.
All right, Sergio, I learned so much about building product at early stage startups, about how AI is impacting product management and engineering, and of course, a little bit about your business. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Aakash, for having me. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If somebody wants to support you and your work and find you online, where can they do that?
So I think back to what I said, I write every day on Twitter, X now. Follow my handle, Sergio Rocks. I'm also on LinkedIn, writing every day. My handle is Sergio MC Pereira. So just search for my name, and I should come at the top of the search. I have a weekly newsletter on remote work, so you will find the links to that as well. And I have my own products, like the Jobs Copilot.ai is my baby right now. I love what I'm doing there. So if you are on the market, make sure to give it a try. And yeah, that's it. I had really a lot of fun doing this, Aakash. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.